I always wondered why it was that it always just takes 500 episodes of One Piece for people to really click with it. I mean, I believed growing up with this series that it's fundamentally the same throughout. I mean, Arlong Park is where it kind of hits its stride, yes, but from there on, it is basically the same kind of structure. So why is it that Arlong Park is great and all, but it's just kind of fine to a new viewer, when by the time you get to Enies Lobby, you're like, oh, this is something special, when it's kind of the same story structure. So I got thinking about it, and like, what is the difference of the later stuff? I mean, there's a bit more nuance to it, I suppose. It's not quite as straightforward, I guess, with more moving pieces. I mean, there's a lot more detail, and there's, magnitudes of more characters. And so in that way, I guess it feels like a bigger world, a lot more going on. It's not just a little straightforward story. But I introduced a friend of mine to One Piece, and yeah, it was just a slow kind of process before he even kind of got into it. And he actually saw the Robin flashback in Enies Lobby. And that's kind of what got him willing to try the show, is because it's very good. But even so, it kind of took him a while to get invested in it, even beyond that initial spark. And so I started thinking, okay, it's not necessarily the place in the story. I mean, it's a very good place in the story, but I started wondering if it's more of a time investment than anything. Like, are you just finally attached to everyone now, and that's why it's so good? But I guess it's just like a little more than that. I mean, for 500 episodes of One Piece can show something that just one arc can't really do on its own. For one thing, there's just the consistency of it. Aside from Syrup Village, which was a long time ago, depending on how far you got into it, everything since then has been remarkably consistently good. And of course, Syrup Village wasn't that bad, but that's where you can still see he's kind of a new author. He's still, Oda's still kind of getting to grips with what makes a good story. But everything after that point, you can't really complain about anything like structure or plot conveniences or anything that really kind of ruins the story in the same way that it does with Syrup Village. Everything is just really solid all the way through. And that's something that is worth earning, and it's something that makes the overall show better the more you watch it. And retroactively makes the old parts of the show feel better, because it's like, oh, it's always this way. And I guess that's where the strength of One Piece lies, is that it gets retroactively stronger the further you move into it, just because it keeps piling up on the past like that in more than just that way. Oda learns of his strength in writing being many moving parts, actually. With the East Blue stuff, it's all just one simple storyline with one main focal character and the branching pieces of that character. But he learned he was onto something with Mihawk, I believe, and then he just started adding more and more little extra pieces, side stories that intertwined with the main, and it got a lot better. So he leaned into that. His character consistency, of course, has been incredibly well done. He keeps focusing on having cool reveals, new pieces of information consistently popping up, and new mysteries consistently popping up as well. And that makes things very appealing throughout the entire story. So that's another part of the consistency. Even old characters are reintroduced organically. And adding all of those points up really kind of starts to show one major thing, is that everything in One Piece matters. Like, it really matters. And that's where Buggy comes in, because he is the best example of this. Buggy literally is important in his own way throughout the entire story of One Piece. I mean, he feels like he should be a one-off villain. I mean, in shows like Dragon Ball, you don't expect characters like General Blue to still be relevant, because it's just a bad guy you beat early on. What other relevance could he possibly have? In Yu Yu Hakusho, do you really expect Suzaku, the Phoenix guy, to ever make an appearance again? He's just a guy to beat, a lot of JoJo's Bizarre Adventures is just one-off villains every chapter or two. And a lot of animes and things, sometimes small characters from the beginning will show up at the end as a big payoff moment. Like I remember with Naruto how old characters like Konohamaru and My Hero Academia, they're in their final battle now, and all the old characters are kind of making an appearance again to kind of give moral support. But for Buggy, Oda's not really just paying lip service like that. and he's definitely not being forgotten. He has his own goal that's entirely separate from Luffy's crew. He wants to get Captain John's treasure. He's the character that introduces Whitebeard as a figure in this world. He has drama that's barely on screen. It's kind of just a goofy side gag, but it's made consistent and it informs later events in his life where he separates from his crew and has issues with them, and then they don't save him from prison when he gets imprisoned. And so it's just like, yeah, we have this very consistent thing that's always informing where he is in this world. And then by the time you get to Impel Down, he becomes a main character again. Like this guy from East Blue, who's basically a jobber, if I'm getting the term right, I don't know. He's just there to be beaten. He's just like, hey, Luffy beat him. He beat his first pirate captain. Yay, let's move on. How does a guy like that manage to become a main character again unless the author really cares about this character? And he has like attachments to more important characters, but it doesn't even define him in the slightest. At best, you could say his rivalry with Shanks belies a greater character underneath, but everything that people that One Piece readers and watchers love Buggy for isn't his relationship with Shanks or Gold Roger. So to wrap it all up, you get the sense that Buggy as a character matters to the world, the story, the author, even if it's not necessarily building up to something super important. He's just crucial to what we understand the story to be. And the most important part is that if you get invested in him, if you like Buggy, you're rewarded for it, because Buggy's always going to be there. He's always going to be part of this world, and he's always going to make or have made it more significant. But yeah, one of the first villains, maybe it's just like kind of a nepotism thing where it's like, of course, it's the first guy you see. It's kind of important just for virtue of being that first pirate captain, or rather first devil fruit pirate captain. But then you see the same pattern emerge for other characters just again and again and again. There's Alvida, who again was the actual first pirate captain Luffy fought. But then there's Hachi, just some guy on Arlong's crew. And then you get Django and Full Body, just this crappy marine and this weird parody character who just likes to dance. And then you keep seeing all these other things from cover stories, all of Baroque works, and they all, like, one of my favorite things, this is a side tangent, I'm not reading from my bullet point list here anymore. One of my favorite things is that Oda takes the time to think, what are all of Baroque works, all these Baroque works characters' dreams? What do they want for themselves? What's their ideal profession? And it's like, I don't know, something's it's just very nice to see that. They feel like fleshed out characters, even though their time in the sun was done like 150 chapters previously. And it's not just for them, even main characters who completed like their arcs, like Usopp. He had his whole own arc when he was introduced, like all the Straw Hats kind of do. But then Oda doesn't just forget about him. He's not just like, well, he's on the main team now. He doesn't really need to grow anymore. He doesn't need to be the center of another story. He's like, no, I care about Usopp enough to give him a story when I feel like it should be relevant to him. And it's just like, that's appreciated. It's appreciated that Oda appreciates Usopp. And I guess Usopp in particular is a good segue because his callback arc, or his new arc, being in Water 7. Water 7 really is kind of the most notable arc where things start to really pile up. Crocodile's goal of finding the Pluton gets more fleshed out, so that's a callback to Alabasta. Oimo and Kashi join the team purely because Oda remembers the connection between Usopp and the Giants on Little Garden. Character payoffs like Nico Robin it happens like 2 arcs after she was introduced, and it feels like they were intended from the beginning as well. It's just you're starting to see pieces fall together more and more, and you couldn't really get that earlier in arcs because there's nothing really to call back to earlier on. But now that you can see that with later arcs, yeah, you kind of just couldn't understand how significant they were until they were called back to. And so you not only get this world consistency, but you get character consistency. Like with Usopp caring for the Mary the most because it was gifted to the crew from his dear friend, potential love interest, Kaya. And it's like, he could just like the ship, but you know what significance that has without it even being said. I don't think he ever brings up Kaya in that arc, but the But if you read it, if you watched it, you just know it. You feel like Kaya, the Mary, Usopp's connection with it all matters because you've seen it. And speaking of the Mary, I loved it. I loved the fact that Mary's damage was consistently carried over from arc to arc. Mary really started getting damage at the end of Alabasta, and that was always an ever-present thing. And every time the Mary took more damage, it was always still there. And you would never really see that with other shows because, I mean, there's a simplicity of status quo, but it was important that all this damage was taken to this world, to this story. So if any of this stuff grabbed your interest, if any of it ever intrigued you, if you ever thought something like, I like how Usopp looks up to giants, or if you ever felt intrigued by what the super weapon Pluton might be, you get consistently rewarded. And by rewarded, I mean you get validation that a thing you latched onto was important to the author. A lot of times you get that situation where it's just like, oh, the drapes were blue and that represents depression, that old meme. And it's just like, no, the drapes were blue, it doesn't matter. But sometimes it does matter. I mean, everything the author puts on a page, whether it's in writing, whether it's something for filming, for TV, everything needs to get put there. So why not have it matter? You know, put in something that you care about. Like just, sorry, this is me as an author speaking and again, going off script. But if you're going to put in something there, put in something that you care about, that you like. And that way it's important to you. And if it resonates with someone else, that's a connection there. That's important between both of you now. And so that acknowledgement that everything in the story is important in some way to the author, to any potential viewer that's seen it, it'll register very strongly. And once that clicks, once that is fully sets into place, once you've seen it happen enough time where that little thing you liked gets validated, that's when One Piece gets good. Because now you are fully allowed to get invested in whatever aspect of One Piece catches your interest. I know there's some part of me that understands in stories that some things just aren't meant to be super important. They're just things to get out of the way. Like, again, going back to Dragon Ball, just because it's such a staple, and of course it inspired One Piece very heavily. Birder from Dragon Ball, or Z, is just there to fill out a slot on a team. You know, he's not gonna have a major character arc. He really is just there to be like, this team is intimidating. He adds to the number, makes the number bigger. The institution of Chunin exams aren't really fundamental to the world of Naruto. They're just needed to facilitate an arc where more characters get introduced. You know, this is probably an editor suggestion. UA from My Hero Academia has giant robots in the entrance exams because it would just be boring without them, and not necessarily for any deeper reason as far as I've seen. And of course that's fine. Like, it really is. Like, parts of a story are necessary to make it feel the way the author wants it to feel. They serve a purpose, even if that purpose is to not really be that important. And so they serve it perfectly. I'm not disappointed when they're not really existing beyond their purpose. But the fact that it happens so often in One Piece gives it a sense of reality more than most other media. And to be fair, almost any piece of media is real in its own special way. But I'm getting off topic. But I do want to go to Wano at this point, so spoilers for that, the very end of it. So that's spoilers right now. Stop the video here. I'll put a time code. Okay, so when Buggy was declared one of the 4 emperors, or the Yonko, if you're into that, with no setup whatsoever, he was just revealed. You know, just like one chapter. Hadn't been mentioned for hundreds of chapters previously, I don't think. And then just suddenly, oh, yep, there he is. He's one of the emperors. And I and pretty much every other fan of One Piece were, of course, thrilled and not surprised in the slightest. We saw that Buggy had this ungodly charisma and dumb luck that would land him in insane leadership positions all throughout the story. And because we knew that Buggy was important, that he mattered, that when he was off screen, we would understand he would continue to exist in this world. He would continue to be thought about by the author, and therefore he would continue to do what he does, which is fail upward, whether it was relevant to the story or not. And so everyone who liked and cared about this trait of Buggy, everyone who laughed at it and everyone who enjoyed it, felt confident from all this experience in thinking that this would continue, to the point where nobody really doubted it would land him in the position of emperor one day. And of course, just like all the other times, the story rewarded us for recognizing patterns like this, and we were rewarded yet again. And of course, now we're certain that Buggy will become king of the pirates. We're just not sure how. Like, maybe Luffy gets the One Piece, but the rest of the world thinks that Buggy got it, or Luffy gives up the title immediately, because that's definitely relevant to Luffy's character. And then Buggy just gets his sloppy seconds. It doesn't really matter in that sense. But what does matter is that Buggy and everything relevant to him does matter. Because Buggy failing upwards is as important to keep consistent as Gold Roger, the geography of the world, Luffy's character, or the plot of the actual arc we're in, we know this is going to be true. All of it's important enough to keep consistent. And we just don't realize that until we've seen it proven over and over and over again. And that just usually clicks around Water 7 for most people. I've seen so many people reading or watching One Piece for the first time get to Water 7 and say, oh, I want to go back and reread through this. Like, they say that specifically. And because you realize they didn't pay enough attention, or they didn't expect what they read the first time to be important at all. They thought it will just move on. That's how most stories work. So the real answer is One Piece doesn't really have to wait 500 episodes to get good. It was pretty much always good. We just can't really notice how good it was until then. And unfortunately, it doesn't make convincing new viewers any easier. But oh well, what are you gonna do? Well, that's the video. Sorry, I kind of rebranded again and started making episodes in a different way. I became a freelance editor, and I've had no time to actually work on my own videos. So I thought, I still want to make these. I still want to talk about One Piece and other stuff I like. So I'm just going to make it a very simple format where I can kind of just talk. And so I hope you enjoy it. If you like what I'm talking about, let me know. I read all the comments, of course. So if you have any interesting thoughts about One Piece or any other kind of anime thing that you feel like I'd be interested in seeing, yeah, I probably would. So if you liked the video, like genuinely, I'm asking this because it feels like such a staple, like and subscribe. No, like actually like the video if you want to see more of this, because I would really like to see if there's actual growth on this from this kind of format, like such a bare bones format. Like, I'm a professional editor at this point. I could do so much better, but I just choose not to for the sake of time. But if you do think it's worth growing, that's how you do it. You press the like button and more people see it based on that. So that would be really cool to see. If you really liked it, I would very much appreciate it. And that's about it. Thanks for watching.